Thanks. Yeah, I haven't said you can do it. So really, it's 3 grand for us. As far as the time.
Good afternoon.
Yeah.
Welcome to the June meeting of the South Central Pennsylvania Genealogical Society. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Jonathan Stair and I'm the president. Glad to see all of you here today. We have a nice crowd. And what we'd like to start with is anyone who's here for the first time. Anybody here for the first time? Okay. What we'd like you to do, no, I'm going to ask Jamie to hold off her introductions till later. What we'd like you to do, the rest of you, is tell us your name, where you're from, and what you're researching, okay? So I saw some hands over here. If you want to start over here, go ahead.
Linda Cunningham from Shrewsbury. The program interested me. I'm
Okay.
not researching anything.
Sure. Sir?
Scott Cunningham, along with
You love her, okay. I see some more hands over here. Go ahead, sir.
Darrell Albright from Mount Wolf. Not really researching anything, just came to listen.
Okay, good. Let's see, yes, ma'am.
We're here just to listen, but we also visited the slate down in Delta.
Okay, good.
Have a good friend that paints on me.
All right,
It was 98.
good.
There.
Did I get everybody? Oh, yes, sir.
My last name's Wales. I had a great grandfather who worked at Della Mines and drove slate wagon from Delta to Carlisle, Indian War College. He also worked on the canal.
Wow. Thank you. Well, welcome once again and thank you for coming. Next order of business, I'm going to read the minutes from our last meeting, which was April the 6th. In May, we were over at the Adams County Historical Society. So these are minutes for April the 6th. President Jonathan Stair called the monthly meeting of the South Central Pennsylvania Genealogical Society to order at 2:30 p.m. on Sunday, April the 6th, 2025. 15 members and guests were present. He welcomed all present and first-time attendees were invited to introduce themselves. Since no copy of the minutes for the March 2nd meeting was available to read, those minutes were approved in absentia. I don't know if any organization ever did that before. That was another point. Treasurer and Membership Secretary Margaret Berg presented the March 2025 financial report showing a starting balance on February 28, 2025 of $16,416.03, receipts of $77, no disbursements, a net cash balance on March 31st, 2025 of $16,193.03. The society currently has 150 members. York County History Center Director of Library and Archives Adam Benz provided information about upcoming programs of the History Center and noted that the History Center will be participating in Give Local York on May 1 and 2, at which time special financial contributions may be made to the center. President Stair then presented the ballot of officers for the upcoming program year. Treasurer Membership Secretary Margaret Berg, Recording Secretary Richard Robinstein, Corresponding Secretary Becky Ann Stein, Member at Large Becky Roman. The election will be held at the June 8th meeting since the May program will be off-site. The president noted that the fee for the tour of the Adams County Historical Society in May is $15 per person, which the SCPGS will pay if it is a financial hardship for anyone who wishes to participate. Additionally, carpooling may be available for that program. Members should check the Facebook page or the SCPGS website for details. Also, he reminded the society the organization's 50th anniversary celebration scheduled for Saturday, September 20th in the Wareheim Room, the York County History Center, with more details to come. Vice President Richard Kunkel gave an overview of future programs. May the 4th will be a tour of the Library, Archives, Museum, the Adams County Historical Society in Gettysburg, and June the 8th, the Welsh of Southern York County by Jamie Noerpel and Jim McClure. He then introduced Tyler Stump, Acquisitions Archivist at the Pennsylvania State Archives, who gave an informative presentation about the history of Farview State Hospital for the criminally insane and related state hospital records at the State Archives. The meeting adjourned at 3:57 p.m. Respectfully submitted, Jonathan R. Stair, President and Acting Recording Secretary. Okay, at this time I'm going to have Margaret give us the treasurer's and membership report.
Okay, the balance as of April 1st, 2025 was $16,493.03. Receipts for April, membership renewals, $730, new members, $60. Publication sales of $199 and a donation through PayPal of $40 for $1,029 in receipts. Disbursements to Postal Connections for the March-April newsletter, $190.11. To Mastoff Press for the printing of the special publication number 93 was $749.58. Leaving the cash balance as of April 30th and May 1st, $16,582.34. The receipts there were no receipts for May. Disbursements in May was to Pennsylvania Heritage Foundation for speaker fee of $125. USPS Post Office for miscellaneous mailing of publication sales, $19.96. To Brown's Orchards, a gift basket of $64.61. Leaving the cash balance as of May 31st, 2025, $16,372.77. Membership is 151 members. We received one new member in April. We have already received renewals of 33 persons have renewed for another year or 2 years. That's it.
Thank you. Adam, anything from the library?
Hello, everyone. Thank you for attending. Of the people who are new, how many of you, let me rephrase this question. For the people who are attending this the first time, is this your first time in the History Center? Yeah? No? Few people. Okay, well, welcome. We hope you enjoy today, and please come back and tour the museum. And if you like that, then please join as members. I'm asked to always plug memberships. What we usually do, or what I usually do at meetings, is to talk about all of our many upcoming events. So if you can bear with me, we will do that. I should have stated, I'm Adam Benz, I'm the director of the Library and Archives. So again, thank you for coming today. Friday the 13th, if you're willing to leave the house, we have 2 events, a walking tour covering churches and cemeteries from 6 to 7:30 p.m. Check our website for details about that. And also in this room, the Tannenberg organ recital by organist Philip Cooper, who has played for us many times in the past. So that will be from 7 till 9 p.m. on Friday the 13th. Saturday, June 14th, we'll have a second Saturday presentation on the history of Hanover and its founder, Richard McAllister. That will be in this room from 10:30 to 11:30 a.m. On Wednesday, June 18th, our Civil War Roundtable will be back. And if you've ever heard the name Scott Mingus, you know you're in store for a great presentation. He'll be talking about the Philadelphia, Wilmington, and Baltimore railroads in the Civil War. That starts at 7:00 p.m. on Wednesday, June 18th in this room, and also on Zoom. On Friday, June 20th, we'll have a reprise of the walking tour covering churches and cemeteries. That's from 6 till 7:30 p.m. Then moving into the month of July, we'll have a July walking tour focusing on architecture. That's on Friday, July 11th, and also on July 18th, again focusing on architecture in the city of York from 6 to 7:30 p.m. And final plug is Saturday, July 12th. That seems very far in the future, but it's not. our Civil War Day. We started one last year. We're trying to continue this on an annual basis. So York County Civil War Day will be at the Colonial Complex just down Pershing from here, about a block or and a half away from here, from 10 in the morning until 3 o'clock in the afternoon. That's Saturday, July 12th, Civil War Day. So those are our upcoming events. My final point is I was asked to provide this sign up sheet. So for those of you, if this is your first time, if you'd like to give us your email address, we can put you on our list, and we do a bi-monthly email blast with upcoming events and other information about the History Center. So if you're interested, I will put this up at this table right here where you can sign up before you leave today. Okay, thank you all very much.
Okay, thank you, Adam. Our next item of business is we have to vote on the officers for next year. I read the ballot in the minutes. I'll go over it again. For treasurer and membership secretary will be Margaret Berg, recording secretary Richard Robinstein, corresponding secretary Becky Anstein, and member at large Becky Roman. I need a motion and a second motion, so,
I'll make a motion that the secretary cast a unanimous ballot.
okay. Second,
I'll second.
all right, members, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Quickly, just a reminder that there will be no meeting in July, and Richard will tell us some more about more upcoming programs in a minute. And I keep plugging this every meeting. Don't forget, we're gonna have our 50th anniversary celebration on Saturday, September 20th in this room. And pre-registration will be required. You won't be able to get in unless you have a ticket. So as soon as that information becomes available, it'll be on our website, our Facebook page, and please pre-register if you want to attend that. We encourage all of you to attend. It's not open, it's open to members, friends, anybody who wants to come, and it's free. So all you have to do is just make sure you get the ticket to come and attend that. At this time, I have Richard Kunkel come and tell us about upcoming programs and introduce our speakers.
Not too much to tell about upcoming programs. Our next regular program will be Sunday, August the 24th. Stay tuned for what that will be. It's in the works. Our October program, that's actually our September program because of Labor Day. Our October program is actually the anniversary celebration of the 20th of September. And then the next program would be the first Sunday in November. We do not have a December program, and then we have programs going on from there. So today we're very happy to have, I guess, 2/3 of hometown history. We have Jamie Noerpel, who has a BA from York College and taught for 10 years at the Milton Hershey School, where she taught high school history. She then went and got a master's degree and a PhD in American Studies from Penn State University, with a focus on history, environmental studies, and literature, as well as a certification in folklore and ethnography. She's been involved with many things, including the Potter's Field, and has become involved with Hometown History, which they do videos. And this is sort of part of that. We're all familiar with James McClure. He's the retired editor of the York Daily Record, York Sunday News, and also served in further leadership with the USA Today Network as the state editor for Pennsylvania, Delaware, and Maryland. He is the author of a number of books, or co-author, mostly author, of York County history, including Never to Be Forgotten, which came out, I guess, when it was our 250th anniversary of York County, and he's updated most of those recently with the opening of the History Center. So our program today is when Peach Bottom Welsh quarried slate to make roofs that seem to last forever. A few reflections here. Many of us here in the Genealogy Society knew Gloria Achenbach, which is a very Pennsylvania German name, but her maiden name was Williams. And actually her father was born in Delta, and he worked for the Gazette and Daily for many, many years. And he was half Delta Welsh. Her Welsh immigrant ancestor was a William Williams who came from Wales, the northern part of Wales, where I think most of the Delta Welsh came from. And first lived in Slatington, which I think is in Northampton County. And his wife fell in the slate quarry and died. And then he made his way down to Delta and left progeny, which included Gloria, who passed away a couple of years ago. She would have been nearly 100 years old now, so keep Gloria in mind when hearing about the Delta Welsh, because she was one of them, so. All right, no further ado, we'll introduce Jamie and Jim.
Thank you, Richard. So thank you so much for having me. I'm Jamie Noerpel, and I'm going to speak for about 20 minutes, and then I'm going to hand it off to Jim, and then Jim will finish with the second half of today's presentation. If you'd like, this was a reboot of an original episode that Dominic Miller and I created about a year ago. So this is on YouTube, and it still has one of our highest views. So there's something about people being really interested in Welsh culture and slating. And of course, we interviewed Don Robinson, who is here with us today. So I encourage you to go and watch that interview, which we conducted inside one of the cottages down there in our Delta. All right, so, and again, here is where we filmed it. I live up in Newberrytown, so it took me a good hour and 10 minutes to get down there. But it was definitely worth the drive. Not only is it beautiful, but those cottages are just a treasure that we have here in York County. I also want to highly recommend this book. This is where Dami and I were able to get the majority of our research. It's very well done, and I believe you can buy it still down there in Old Line Museum. You can't anymore.
Very few left.
Okay, there you go. So don't all run towards it when you leave here today. But really, this is where we got a lot of our information. And also, I want to preface with, we could have, we're going to focus on slate today and the Welsh, but we could have really talked about any story in York County down there in the Delta Peach Bottom area. People live very full lives. We could have talked about the canals. We could have talked about the men and women who served our country. And we're going to cover some of those stories tonight because we think it's important to talk about the human beings behind the quarries. But really, this is just a small snippet of our York County culture. So I'll start with Peach Bottom and where it got its name. I'll talk about the immigrants who came here over time, what it was like living down there, of course, quarrying slate, some community stories, and then finish with our takeaways. I'm actually going to start with our takeaways as well, because I was a teacher, and I think it's important to review what I want you to leave with, our thesis, if you will. So first is that, York County is filled with tons of different ethnicities and backgrounds and cultures, but the Welsh foremen are probably the least known out of all the immigrants. The Welsh are influential both in the things that they left behind and in the way that they live their lives. And some of their aspects are still with us today. If you look down there, like I said, down in Castleton, you can still see a lot of the culture, which was around from 1845 to about 1940, so about 100 years. And it is some of the most unique aspects even in America today. But also, this area has lots of other waves of immigrant groups. We've got the American Indians, Maryland settlers, just so funny we consider them immigrants. But yes, the Marylanders came up, enslaved Black people, and now the Amish. But today we're going to focus on the Welsh. So when I started my research, I thought, are there peaches in Peach Bottom? Like, where did that name come from? Nope, not really. We don't really know of any orchards down there. In the book, The River and the Ridge, they said when it all started is not known of the origins of it. We do know that the first reference came in 1737. There was Baltimore County, they ordered a man named Caleb Preverall to clear a road from Peach Bottom down the river of Susquehanna. And that was the first time it was mentioned. But yeah, we still don't know if there are any peaches, but probably not. We also know that there's a ferry, the Peach Bottom Ferry, which started transporting people and goods and animals across the river starting back in 1725, according to the book. We don't know if that was the name of it during that time, though, but there was absolutely a ferry at one point called Peach Bottom. So let's get into then the slate, which is what makes this area the most unique. Here is, Jerry Jones would be very proud of me. Here is a map of all the rock that is in York County, and you'll notice that small little sliver in the bottom right-hand corner. The slate down there is about 12 miles long, the vein, but it's never thicker than half a mile. So it's pretty unique spot. I'm gonna take you back to middle school earth and space. Do you remember the 3 types of rock? Igneous, good. Sedimentary and
One that's pressed together.
starts with an M. Metamorphic, very good. All right, gold star. So this is metamorphic rock. And what happens is when there is rock that it started with shale and it was laid in layers underneath the ocean. Isn't that crazy? We were under an ocean right here. There was an ocean. And then because of volcanic ash and these tectonic plates coming together, it forces them up into mountains. So not only do we have an ocean here in York County, but then we had really tall mountain ranges that were very lofty. But then over years and years and years, eons of slow erosion and pressure and winds and elements, that's why we have the rolling hills that we have here today. But that was the beginning of slate. All that time and pressure is what created it. So no, we no longer have these large mountains in York County, but we do have is these beautiful rolling hills that left behind that small vein of slate, which is said to have been the best in the world when it came to roofing. And I stand behind that. I do think it's some of the best in the world. Part of it is they don't fade. Those the slate roof doesn't fade for centuries, right? Centuries. And think about how often now I need to replace my roof. What do they say? Every 15 to 20 years, right? Centuries. And the reason is slate has in these 2 different minerals, mineral quartz and alumina. Both of them make them extremely resistant to weathering. So believe it or not, the Welsh were not the first to dig in the quarries. The Welsh were not the first ones to go after the slate. During the 1800s, quarry workers were mostly English and Scots-Irish. And just another little tiny history lesson, the Scots-Irish, they were descendants of Scots who then moved to Ireland and lived there for 2 or 3 generations, but then they maintained that Scottish heritage. That's why they're called that. The Delta region is marked by, again, the Scottish-Irish presence, which dates back to 1730. Here's a quote by a man named Stephen Gill Boyd. He was a resident of the Peachbond Township and a descendant of the Scots-Irish Quakers. And he wrote an article in the Delta Herald in 1884. I thought I would give you a quote because I thought it was just remarkable. He wrote, "If they lack the patient blotting industry of the German and something of the intelligent thrift of the English Quakers, and the culture of the English settlers of Maryland nearby, they lived upright Christian lives, devoted to their religion and to church affairs, and next to their religion, they held sacred the education of their children." I thought, oh, isn't that cool? So he basically said the Scots-Irish weren't industrious and they weren't very intelligent, but darn it, if they didn't go to church and educate their kids, they cared about that. So neither the English or the Scots-Irish really had much experience with quarries. When they first started, the slate was crudely cut. It was not uniform in its size or its thickness. But one of the former quarry foremen that was actually from Lancaster, his name was Peter Williamson, and he knew of the slate industry over in Wales. And he also knew that the Welsh had families that were eager to migrate because they were unhappy with their wages and the way they were treated. And so some agents went over, they spoke very highly of America, and specifically York County, and they encouraged the Welsh to come over and start working in our quarries. So they started working for Williamson in about 1845. So the process of bringing the Welsh over was intentional. There were agents that went over. Now the Welsh knew slate. They knew where to place the drill in the rock, they knew how deep to drill it, they knew how much black powder to use. So once they came over, we're going to see a huge reduction in waste, more safe time, and the products are also going to be higher quality as well. So I told you a little a quote, right, from Stephen Gill Boyd, but I also want to talk to you about a woman named Betty Griffith Williams. Oh, and here's, by the way, if you were wondering, here's where, Wales, if you didn't know where that was, where they came over, and then all the ways, like I said, that they helped the slate industry. So yeah, Betty Griffith Williams, she was a retired teacher and she talked about her family and how they came over to York in this book. And she talked about how her great grandfather, his name was Hugh Rowlands, he came to Peach Bottom around 1850. And now his son wanted to go to Australia, but he said, no, I wanna go to York County, because he heard of the good slate that we had here. So he came alone, he worked really hard for a year. He left behind his wife and 3 kids. He had 2 daughters and a son. And so in 1851, he had saved up enough money, so just after 1 year, to pay for his entire family to get on that ship and cross the Atlantic, which they did. But unfortunately, and this is where the story gets a little bit sad, when he was waiting on the docks for them in Philadelphia, there was only one person that stepped off that boat, and that was his daughter. His wife and other daughter and son died from cholera, and then they were buried at sea. So we didn't even get to, see their bodies. But his daughter Jane grew up. She ended up having kids of her own, and they had kids of her own. And one of them then was Betty. And so she lived to tell this story and talk about the loss, but then also the perseverance of her family. So here's what some of the Welsh homes would have looked like. So these cottages, they are, like I pointed in that map, they're a very small community down the Mason-Dixon line. They were built between 1845 and 1860. They were originally constructed as the quarry workers' housing. And then Don Robinson, it feels funny to like quote him as he's in the room, but he did a story for YDR, and he said, they didn't know how to build houses out of wood. That's an American thing. They knew how to build houses out of stone. And look, it's been 100 and some years and they're still standing there and still beautiful. Not surprising either is these houses are identical to the ones that are in the slate regions over in Wales. So if you were to visit, they would look identical. These houses are also on the National Register of Historic Places, but they are in need of restoration. On the street, like I said, there are about 4 cottages. One is privately owned and occupied. And there's one that's been restored, it's open to visitors that Dami and I went into, and there are 2 others that are connected with the Old Mine Museum. And like I said, Dami and I filmed one of our episodes inside the cottages, and Don kind of walked us through some of the things that they would find in it that we highly recommend. All you have to do is go to YouTube and type in hometown history in the Welsh, and it should pop up. So the Welsh quarrymen were present for about 100 years here in York County. But their legacy lives on primarily in this right here. This is the Rehoboth Welsh Chapel. There they've got music and they still practice. But you can also see some of the slate sidewalks. I mean, where else are you going to see slate sidewalks? I mean, you talk about a unique American folklore practice. It's not very common anywhere else. Again, like I said, the Old Mine Museum that you can go and visit as well. There's also, and if there's anyone in here that can correct my enunciation, I would appreciate it. There's a twice a year Samanfu Ganu. Was that close? Not even close.
Amalfi Gani.
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 Thank
The
you very
U
much.
is an I in Welsh, and I think it's pronounced as an I.
Say it one more time for me then.
Amalfa
Gamalfa,
Gani.
Gani. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. I'll tell you a poem I would tell my students when I was a teacher. Roses are red, violets are blue. You're teaching me just as much as I'm teaching you. My kids always got a kick out of that. All right. So I talked to you about, we're gonna get way more into the slate and the quarrying, but also the culture. When I was reading through this book, was a mention of societies or clubs that would meet. This is a picture taken from the Delta School in 1897, and now it wasn't at this school, it was the Slate Dale School, but they would have had a literary society called the Society of 1880. There's no picture of it that I could find, so I wanted to show you this instead because it's pretty much close to the same time, so it would have been about the same, the kids would have looked about the same. But look at that spunky young woman, like right in the front with her arms on her hips, right? I just think that I would love to sit down and talk to these kids of what life is like. But in this literary society, again called the Society of 1880, they met at different homes and they debated things like, is Mars inhabited? Yeah, I love seeing this squirrely kids. Here is a picture of one of the societies, the Anti-Cigarette League. We take for granted that you and I were raised in a time where cigarettes were, told they were bad, right? But back in the late 1800s, everybody smoked, even doctors said it was okay to smoke. So the fact that there was a league that said anti-cigarette is pretty progressive. And then underneath I cut the caption, but it said in the book, several of these lads are known to have become 2 packs a day smokers, but we will not tell you which ones. So let's get into quarries. So during the weekends and evenings, the communities would gather and have fun, but during the day, they were in these quarries. The quarrying of slate did not take off until the Welsh came here, and it started just by shallow surface pits. So slate would have been protruding from the ground, but once they exhausted that, which happened fairly quickly, they started digging into the earth to then cut out those large slabs of rock. Horses or mules would have hoisted the slabs using a derrick, and then they actually would have dropped it onto either a cannonball or a river stone, shattering it into small, more manageable pieces that they could move around themselves. There was a total of 12 operating quarries with a total of about 200 to 400 employees. A typical day would have been 8 to 12 hours, and here's a picture of the quarry workers. The 8 to 12 hours is completely dependent on the season, right? And if they could see what they were doing. So it started at sunrise, and then by 9 a.m., a steam whistle would blow for a peacetime. This was the Welsh custom of taking a 10-minute break, and they would have some snacks. Guess what kind of snacks they had? What would you have if you were taking a break? So your coffee, they had tea. They absolutely had tea. They had a sandwich, and then they'd also have a boiled egg. Very healthy of them. Boiled egg. Today I had pretzels and mustard before I came here. They did not have pretzels and mustard. Then they would go back to work. They then would take another half hour for lunch where they would eat sandwich, fruit, and more tea. And then when it was time to end for the day, the whistle would blow around sunset of each day, and down the ridge they came. And in the book, they said that they would often hear them singing songs. Some of the songs that they would sing are Welsh hymns or even Yankee Doodle. Kids worked in the quarries as young as 10. They could work in the quarries as either a bell ringer or a water boy. Now, in the quarries, the quarry owners, you want to guess what ethnicity were the quarry owners? They weren't Welsh.
English.
They were English. They were English. And as Don has thankfully pointed out, the Welsh language is very different from English. And so in the quarries, they would speak Welsh. So there was this privacy between employer and employee that the employers really couldn't hear what the Welsh were saying about or what they were talking about. So here are the kings of the quarries. These were these slate splitters. Before table saws, they would have drilled holes in by hand perpendicular to the cleavage or the splitting plane. They would have pounded wedges into it, which is what you see them doing there. They would have added pressure slowly to split the rock because their goal was to get it 3/16 of an inch. How specific, right? 3/16 of an inch, and that took some skill. They also, in order to do that, had to make sure that the slate was moist inside, or else it would splinter and damage it, which they called that sap. They called that inside sap. They were the highest paid employees of $1.50 to $2 a day, which is twice the amount that others made. So while Peach Bottom, look at this picture, right? Like look at the quarry, the cleavage you can see sticking out, and this guy is on top. OSHA would not approve of this. But you can imagine too, there were a lot of accidents. So while this was some of the best slate in the world, it was also some of the most difficult to obtain compared to the other parts of the United States. And that's because you can see these rock cliffs, right? So I'll go over, there's tons of different stories that I could share in this book, but I'm just gonna share just one. So around dinner time, the foreman of the Peach Bottom Slate Manufacturing Company fired a blast. They thought all the drilled holes that were filled with explosives were blown out, but they were wrong. There were still some explosives that haven't gone off yet. So 2 men that were down there, when unfortunately it did explode, were thrown into the air. 2 other men were standing nearby, were pelted with stones and were injured. And there was 1 man whose name was Thomas Williams, and he had his back to the explosion. And unfortunately, there was a rock that struck him right in the back of the head, and he died instantly. Thomas Williams. He was a Welsh immigrant. He had lived in the vicinity for about 34 years, and he was known to be the best rockman here. And his death really shook the community. Here's another picture of a quarry. This was the Robert L. Jones quarry taken around 1885. So if you're digging in the earth, what happens when you go to the beach and you start digging a hole? What's it start filling up with? It happens in York County too. We have that river right there, so the water table is high enough that it begins filling with water. So what they needed inside were water pumps to get it out, or to protect the equipment though. See those logs there? That was protecting the water pump, okay? And it got to the point where there was so much water coming in, they couldn't even keep it out in time. The pumps couldn't work that fast. So, there you can see another picture of the logs protecting the steam pump as well. So over in the top right-hand corner, it's a little difficult, I'm sorry, left-hand corner, it's kind of difficult to see. But this is let me see here. This is where the young boy would have been standing. This is the shed, the shanty, the bell ringer shanty is what it's called. A young boy would have signaled to the hoisting engineer below, who was pulling up the rope to pull up the cable, the large slabs. And they would have guided him to move it because the engineer couldn't see what was happening after the cable lifted the slab and got all over the edge. So the bell ringer in that shanty would have then used a line with a bell to signal to the engineer where he's going, if it's left or right or down or forward. But again, like, I mean, it's so crude, but it worked, right? So the decline of slate. The industry endured a lot of ups and downs, but the Great Depression really landed that death blow. They found themselves competing with much cheaper alternatives for roofs. Think about asphalt shingles and even corrugated steel. So many companies held one until the 1950s, another until the 1970s, and they actually started selling byproducts of slate when roofs weren't mostly used for paint and cosmetics. They would sell dust out of slate. Even before the quarries though shut down, they were running into problems. Here you go, because like I said, the unsafe conditions. Like I said, the water became such an ordeal to try to pump out that in a lot of ways, once they reached about 200 feet, the water submerged the rock faster than they could pump it out. They also really didn't think far enough ahead when they were mining. When they would pull the slate out, they just stuck it on the edge. They didn't safely put it back far enough. So here's a picture of some of the rock slides that happened. So unfortunately, yeah, they weren't forward enough thinking that it became quite dangerous. So I'm gonna quickly go through some of the artifacts. I wanna make sure Jim has enough time here to get up. There is the Humphrey Pritchard clock. This is a clock made of 3 different types of slate. Look at the craftsmanship of that. That's made from rock that if you broke it, you couldn't use, right? You had to constantly be adding more to it. They also have beautiful headstones with a beautiful death iconography on it. You can see clasped hands, roses, weeping willows, and even on some of them, they have quotes about the people that live there. So on one of this woman, it says, "Nasty words and gossip. She never used to upset her neighbor. Yes or no, were all this wise lady said." I'm not sure what I would put on my headstone, like, "Jamie, she doth talk too much." I don't know, something like that. Again, we put out the sidewalks, and then of course you can still see that beautiful slate roof because, like I said, they last for centuries. Here's a picture of the old country store. This was in Delta around 1913. Here's another picture I thought that was just stuck out to me. This is in the 1920s, Delta's fire chief. He had his assistant Fritz, sitting there right beside him. Here's the school too. I really like this picture because one, it shows like the diversity in the area, right? But here I have 3 kids that just graduated that continue to go on and live fully successful lives. And yeah, I think you should just remember the human beings that live there, in addition to all their stories. So one of the final stories I thought was just remarkable was in the 1950s when the rest of us were getting our TVs. Delta and Beach Bottom also got TVs, but they, because of a boxing championship, they took their TVs and they just set them out in the middle of the street. So they took these long cables and everyone set up their lawn chairs and it became this beautiful community activity. Now this picture is taken in 1905, so imagine this 50 years later, but can you imagine doing that today? Like shutting down a street and the neighbors pulling out their TV with the long cables and all sitting together. Watching TV has become such an individualized activity that we do in our own homes privately, but for Delta, it was a community activity.
That was the first TV in town.
That one?
In fact, it was the only TV in town at the time.
So, was it a quarry owner that had the first TV?
No, it was a fellow that actually had some contracts hauling slate for the quarry. But
Okay,
they were not cheap at all. But
okay.
he was the only fellow that could probably
Afford it, right, afford it. Well, that's nice, he was willing to share. That says something. Now how Delta got its name, also is slightly interesting. So nobody could agree on what to name the area. Now we know it is Delta, but they couldn't agree. They, finally called everyone to a meeting and they said, we're gonna get together and hash this out. They met at a pub, an ale shop, which I think was just an amazing idea. And the leadership started thinking about all the different names, of families that were in the area. So they thought, can we name it Kilgorestorm or Hollinsville or Parksburg or Stubbsville? But there's no consensus. So one of the doctors, Dr. Kilgore, suggested the first letter of the Greek alphabet. He said, what if we call our town Alpha? And everyone said, I don't like that. So then Dr. Park, he suggested the 4th letter, which is Delta. And everyone really enjoyed that. So that's how it's got its name. Something as simple as that. I encourage you guys to go and watch the episode that Dami and I made. I want to make sure that Jim has enough time to share, but milk production was very interesting. Here are just some of the beautiful pictures of the creameries that they would have had. So people no longer, because Delta was growing into, a small town and village, people didn't have their cows anymore. So they started outsourcing. So here is one of the creameries that would have been powered by steam. And even there was the milkman that went around to everyone's house and dropped off the milk. And Ed Hughes had quite the delivery. If you look at all the different places he went, including down in Maryland, it's pretty impressive. So my takeaways, Jim's gonna have his own, I'm sure, but my takeaways are that York County has a beautiful different tapestry of ethnicities and background, but the Welsh are probably some of the most underappreciated that we have and understudied. They left behind beautiful culture, which you can still see down there with their sidewalks and their churches and their roofs. And their legacy is left from that about century time period that we're here, from about 1840s to the 1940s. And finally, we still have lots of other migrants through the area as well. So, can we wait to do this, Jim?
No.
We do? So we've got, and this is both Jim and I's talking schedule. Jim is presenting on June 20th at Ali on the Valencia. Then June 28th, all of us will be at the Mifflin House. I'm really excited to do that. So that'll be open to the public. It's a Saturday night. So please come down and we're gonna learn all about the Mifflin House. And there's even gonna be a food truck, so that's cool. July 3rd, Jim's gonna be talking about the Susquehanna and Chief Uncas. July 4th, Declaration of Independence down at First Pres. And then we're all gonna come back again for Adam gave a plug for that July 12th, the Civil War Days. We're all gonna be speaking about the Battle of Hanover, which would be great. Right, now, we've all been waiting for.
Yeah, it's too bad Don could be here because that's the best part, Jamie Don's best part of the show. We always have, when we do these presentations, we always have a deep dive. Or it's called an extra, and that I'm kind of doing the extra today, and sometimes it's not on the, it's a different topic. The same topic, but a different way into the topic, and that's what we'll be doing today. I spent, essentially, we're going to do a kind of a deep dive into in 20 minutes, deep dive into the Scots Irish and the Welsh, religious culture. Because there's a lot of similarities there, and this is a tough topic to talk about, because it's just a tough topic, but I wanted to do it because there's an audience that would appreciate this type of topic. It's you all. This is a great audience here, and when you know your stuff. And so so I had the privilege of spending an afternoon down at Delta, working with Don Robinson to go down there, and I had 3 stops when I was there, and I kind of was part of a group that we'll see these 3 stops. One was at the Welsh Chapel, another one was at Slatefield and Colson Town, and then last one we were back at the chapel for a Welsh and English service. And some big topics that we'll explore today are the religious practices of the Welsh, and how to navigate a visit to Delta. And to that end, if I don't get to it at the end and very thoroughly, Don Robinson has set up over here some brochures, and there's some contact information and so on if you want to go on a tour of the cottages and the Old Line Museum, which is in itself is very, very interesting. So, okay, so these are some of the things that we will work on today. One is the River and the Ridge. Jamie said a lot about this. I think this is the best local history book, a local level history book in York County. I think West Manchester's done a great job of theirs, but this is a very, and it's well written. The writing in it is beautiful, and so it gives a platform to go from, to look into other areas such as what I did today. We're going to focus just on the religious scene today. Delta, Cardiff, Whiteford's Main Street hosted at least 10 different Christian churches, not all Protestant, but Christian churches. We'll focus on a couple today, primarily the Scots Irish Presbyterian and the Welsh, Calvinistic Welsh Methodists and their impact on Delta. And we'll unpack Stephen Boyd. Jamie gave this about the Scots Irish. Well, the one thing I'll talk about a lot here is they held sacred the education of their children. Children in the Scots Irish culture, and they are in many cultures. I'm saying I come from that culture, Scots Irish Presbyterian culture. It's not that other cultures don't do it, but they certainly do it here in the Welsh culture. Does the same way, and there's a reason for that we'll talk about. Oops. Okay. Just get. I think I clicked past. Yeah. So this is kind of Main Street in the 3 towns down there, Delta, Cardiff, and Whiteford, and all these churches here operated at one time. They often overlap, but not always. But you can think, the way I look at it, and these numbers are hard to get, but you have about 1,000 people in each of these 3 small towns, and then in 1920, and then you had roughly 2,000 Peach Bottom area. So in that area, you might have 5,000 people in 1920, which is about when the slaves started subsiding, and that's about the size of Dallastown today. So think about Dallastown today. There's a United Church of Christ, or German Reformed, that is now is Seventh-day Adventist. You have a Coptic church, it's an old Methodist church, Coptic Christian church. You have the Methodist church there, Bethlehem. Well, it's no longer that, Bethlehem Church, and there's the Catholic Church. So in this town with about the same number of people, look at the number of churches that are there. There's 2 Welsh churches, at least 2. There's 2 Presbyterian churches, Episcopal, Roman Catholic, and so on. The Albright Evangelicals, the Germans even snuck in there, for a while. And someone told me one time that the Germans really, if you think about St. Luke's Church in New Bridgefield, there aren't Germans south of there in that part of the county. I found a German Methodist church down in near Indian Steps, so that's not right. But there's not very many Germans down in this area, at least in the Delta area. But there was an Albright Evangelical church there for a while. There's a black church is still there, still meets there in the town right across from the Welsh Chapel. There's 2 Baptist churches, unusual for a small town in York County, have 2 Baptist churches. And Church of the Nazarene and Calvary Chapel. I love this one. They've only been there since 1996. Calvary Chapel is the Jesus movement. Out in California, they found that there's a movie recently, Kelsey Grammer played this, the pastor that founded the church, and Jonathan Rumi, the guy from The Chosen, that was part of the cast there. And so it's kind of a hip California church down in Delta. So it's kind of interesting. It's broadly evangelical. I wonder what the story is there. You know, it's got to be a story there. But it just goes to show the diversity of churches down there in that area. Now, the Welsh came and they had a church. They were Calvinistic Methodists. I'll get into that in a few minutes. There's a Bethesda church, and then there was the Rehoboth church. Probably didn't say that right, but Rehoboth church. So they were together in one church, and then the Rehoboth church went and they started worshiping. They had a split, and they started worshiping at the Slakeville Presbyterian Church. And but then they had a concern there about language. This was about 1850. And that wasn't the only place there was concern about language in York County. You know, we know Charlie Gladfeller wrote in York County Lutherans about 1850 was kind of a mark, kind of the tipping point where the German language gave way to English language services. And here they were having that struggle. What should services be in Welsh or should it be in English? So the Rehoboth congregation formed their own church after meeting in the Slakeville Presbyterian for a long time. The chapel, the Rehoboth chapel history here, Welsh Chapel, says at the time when all children were attending schools taught in English, Rehoboth clung to their own language for teaching Sunday school in Welsh and English. Pupils memorized verses in both languages. It was through Sunday school that the children of Welsh families were exposed to their heritage and language. So you can see that children again emerge in the Welsh culture. We saw earlier about the Presbyterian culture, and here we go again in the Welsh culture. And today the church, by the way, is now a nonprofit working under Presbyterian, working under a nonprofit preservation partnership. This is an interior shot of the church here. So there's a synergy between the Presbyterians and the Welsh, and I think it has to do with their common theology. And here we have the Slakeville Presbyterian pastor praised the Welsh pastor in about 1850. Well, a little bit after that, our brother has been held in love by the Welsh people. And the Welsh pastor praised Slakeville Presbyterian congregation as its grandmother. The only reason why our people left Slakeville is that you did not speak Welsh. So sometimes we think about, Methodists as not being Calvinistic. We think about Methodists as being, followers of John Wesley, who was on the choice side. And, but here it's interesting that in Wales, the Calvinistic Calvinists, the Welsh in Wales were Calvinistic, and they were here as well. So there's a lot of similarities between the theology of the Presbyterians who were Calvinistic and the Welsh who were Calvinistic. So I got interested in this to begin with because I ran across something that to address, and this was, we might think about the coal miners and the slate miners in Wales as being, uneducated. You might come across, you might think that. I'm just going to give a lot of examples from a story. I'll go into the story in a second. To address labor shortages in World War I, Welsh companies would provide educational cultural lectures for their employees. One visitor was surprised to overhear two miners discussing Einstein's theory of relativity. This was in Wales, but this was transported down to southeastern York County as well. When one worker lost at billiards, he would cheer himself up by rehearsing philosophical theories of an Irish philosopher who I'd look up. I didn't know who that was. One miner spent his weekends collecting fossils from the mine's rubble. And then there's other examples. This comes from the work of Jonathan Rose that I ran across. When economic downturn led to massive layoffs in the 1920s, this is in Wales, out of work miners in this town were reading on average 86 books a year. Okay, one miner found that his real education began down in the pit, and where he learned from other miners about the ideas of Spencer, Darwin, and so on. He was looking for a book by George Meredith, who went to the miners' library, and there's already 12 people waiting, for it. Again, this was transported over to the Delta Beach Bottom area. These, I can keep giving examples, but these are just great examples. This one, laborers would name their children after their favorite classical composers. In one family, there was a Handel, Haydn, Elgar, Verdi, Joseph Perry, Caradog. That's a Welsh name, apparently. That's a great name. You know, imagine growing up, someone calls you a dog. That's great. That's a, if you're an NBA, I'm an NBA fan, that's a basketball association. If you're called a dog in NBA, you're good. You know, not everybody gets that. So that's a great name. Mendy for Mendelssohn and unforgettable Billy Bach, together with an only daughter, Rosie for Rossini. You know, so I started going over a list of names of folks down in southeastern York County to see if any of these names were reflected, whether there's a Beethoven, Griffith or something, and I didn't get very deep into the list, but that's the job to be done. So you know, I think this is often, I'll just read this because I guess it's just so clear that, and this is true of southeastern York County too. Was the culture of the Welsh chapel goers narrow and stifling? The scriptures open up lush and beautiful terrains. The Bible was great literature that inculcated habits of appreciation for great literature. As one working class man eloquently recalled, I defy any child of ordinary intelligence to read the Bible constantly without acquiring a genuine literary taste. So I'm going to show you in a few minutes why all that is true down in southeastern York County as well. This is one example of that, coming from the river and the ridge. And this was, I can't pronounce this, but they would have competitive gatherings down there in southeastern York County. And these were basically competitive gatherings, and they would do solo singing, instrumental, literary recitals. There is a literary festival in 1800s down in southeastern York County. You know, would you thought about that? Sesame would have occurred to you? You know, this was new to me. Awards were given for the best translations from English to Welsh. There was, of course, always that concern about losing that identity by losing that language, the Welsh language. And so this was common down there. You know, this is something that I wrote that I've done a couple of stories for the Sunday News on this topic. If the Welsh made an impact with their hands in quarrying the ridge, their hearts, minds, and souls were filled with their Welsh or Calvinistic Methodist faith, akin to Presbyterian beliefs, coming from revivals in Wales in the 1700s. From their tongues came the Welsh language, which the church and its Sunday schools sought to preserve. So basically, in the Methodist circles, John Wesley, who was the choice guy, you know, the free will guy, he was in Britain, but George Whitefield, who was a Calvinist, ministered in Wales. And of course, George Whitefield came here, and well, John Wesley did too, and they did mission trips and over here as well. So that reinforced the Calvinism of the Methodists in Wales, and that came over here. Remember what we saw before. There's 2 Presbyterian churches in Delta, Cardiff area. There's 2 Welsh churches in there. So there's a big audience. Those are big congregations down there.
Jim,
Yes.
can I mention something?
Yeah.
That previous needs mentioning?
Okay.
The group photo, go back.
Yes.
Group there. That's the visitation we had 2 years ago from 72 Welsh kids on their class trip, which they do every other year, what we would call juniors and seniors in high school. And they visited us in February of all months, even though it's terribly cold.
Right.
They are all Welsh speakers. The English did their absolute best to eradicate the Welsh language in Britain itself. It was outlawed. You were punished for speaking Welsh, the kids were.
Right.
That's all changed now. So they had instituted Welsh language schools only for these kids to bring back the Welsh language. And it has been a huge success, believe it or not. So you go there today, most of the signs are bilingual, most of the people are bilingual, but these kids would talk to each other in Welsh, and that was a real treat to hear that in this country.
Thank you, Don. And I have that note up there that when they went to look at the Slatefield tombstones or gravestones, they saw, that's my town, that's my town. They saw their towns
Oh, yeah.
listed on there.
Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. So, so Delta got a double dose of this, with the Protestant work ethic, which is often assigned to the Scots Irish. It was also Welsh being of the Calvinists. That meant, in other words, people of that culture really, they saw their work as an extension of their calling. If their work in the workplace was something they could do to honor God. So not only did the folks down in Delta have the Presbyterians who came first, but the Welsh then came later and they had the same theology. So a lot of hardworking bunch down there. And so is there any reason to doubt that the slate that they would make would be cut perfectly and split perfectly? And, if you see some of those stacks of slate, they're just perfect the way they did it. So they did this to honor God. That was what was driving them. A big part of the population down there. So here's the real reason why I went down there was I understood from Don that there was a Welsh library in the Welsh chapel. And so I went down there and we were able to get Dick Baskwell, who is a Welsh speaker. It's a Presbyterian pastor, Welsh speaker. And they opened up the library. I was able to look at it. And it's hard to see there, but the books there, this was Aristotle's works and Pilgrim's Progress. So there were secular books in there too, but there's Bibles and all kinds of theology books in Welsh. So there's a real treasure trove down there. As far as I know, it's not indexed or cataloged. So you have to kind of rummage carefully, of course, through that. But but this came, according to Dick Baswell, this came from the homes of the Welsh. They would turn over their libraries when they had transitioned in their families, and that they grew this major library. Dick Baswell told me this is the largest library he's seen in America of Welsh language books. So let's see. There's a cornerstone at the Reboth Chapel, and they put in that cornerstone a Bible, a hymn book, catechisms, and confessions of faith. So they had all that stuff again, showing that they took their religion experience really seriously down there. You can see that this is a Welsh language Bible that they have down there. Okay, so I'm going to do a time check here. How many people were catechized when you were young? Okay, a couple of Lutherans did it big time. Catholics did it. Some couple folks did. I have with me here. We did that for our kids, and you can see this is kind of a beat up children's catechism. It's not because we used it. We did use it, but mainly it's kind of when the cat jumped on laps. You kind of had to get the cat off the laps because the cat would always be messing up when we were trying to do our catechism or catechizing our kids. And this is also done. This was done in Presbyterian circles. Franklin's office has a case where in the Stewartstown area they'd have church picnics and they would have some people. They made note that one person had did all 144 questions of the children's catechism. So this is part of culture. So I'm going to take a little risk here and see if I can if I can even do the rudimentary part here. So if you've never seen a catechism, this is the way it goes.
Who made you?
God
What else did God make?
made all things
Why did God make you in all things?
for his own glory.
How can you glorify God?
By loving him and do what he commands.
Why ought you to glorify God?
Because he made me, he takes care of him.
Can God do all things?
God can do all his holy will.
What is sin?
Sin is any one of conformity unto or transgression of the law of God. Aren't you asking me what does transgression mean? Anyway, what you'd often do when the kids would go and go through those quickly, we would say, okay, do it again, but mean it this time. And so it's one thing to do a road, it's another thing really to believe it. This is really what I wanted to find there, is whether in that library they had catechisms, because if they had catechisms in that library, you knew they took it seriously. You know, that's gets back to the children, you know, and so, yes, Dick was able to uncover, and he was able to read this is the catechism. And it's probably the same catechism that, similar to what I just did, because you can see the questions are short. If, go to the adult catechisms, they're long, so I just did the children's catechism. You know, so anyway, but that's the way, but in your county in the 1700s and 1800s, that's the way you learned, that's the way they did. They're not, they didn't all have books on bookshelves and homes everywhere. They might have had a Bible, but they didn't, this is what we just saw here was the way that it's kind of an oral history exercise. It's kind of a folklore exercise. And so that's the way, that's what they did down there. And there's proof there's a catechism in their library down there, a Welsh catechism. Okay, so in our trip, this is stop number 2, which I'm gonna fly over, but we had a state senator from Wales there, you know, so he was born in Cardiff, he's an attorney, so he accompanied us. So if you see this guy on these slides, that's him, and I'll get back to him in a second. We've already gone over that. And Jamie, I'll just mention, there's a Tyson down there in Slateville. You have some Welsh blood in you probably.
Could be, there's 3 Tyson clans though in York County.
Yeah.
So,
This is a Welsh,
yeah.
one. So I just love this here. You talk about ways of communicating. Here's the ways of communicating in the 1800s here, late in the 1800s. Okay, here's the way you communicate today. You know, it's 2 different worlds, isn't it? That we're covering here in this discussion. You know, we're covering this world and we're covering this world. You know, who says things don't change in your county? You know, I don't know if all change is good. You know, this electronic sign up in the middle along a road, a country road, I'm not sure if that adds to things or not, but I don't really think so, but that's the way the congregation chose to do it. Okay, real quick, Jamie did some of this, but I think there's some things I'll point out here. There are 4 cottages left. This is the one cottage. These 3 are under the Old Line Museum's jurisdiction here. This is the 4th cottage. It's privately owned, and so we'll quickly go over the 4 standing cottages. This shows Colson Town right here. This is an 1860 in the Shearer and Lake map. I looked at 1876 map, and it was about 12 cottages there at the time. So this is the early cottages. And Don, I don't know if you'd agree with this, but these 4 cottages here are the cottages that we're talking about here today. They may be among the oldest cottages, because Shearer and Lake point out those 4 lined up just like that. Which is the way, there's 3 of the 4 left today, as you know. So.
Yeah, well, there's the 4 original stone cottages you see today are the first structures.
That's what I'm trying to say, yeah.
But you go into Cardiff, you're going over the Mason-Dixon
Right.
into Cardiff. Now.
Right.
There's 4 over there as well, and there were a couple more besides that. They eradicated or whatever.
Right.
I don't know exactly. That's why I need to do deed research, see
Right.
which really was first. But we suspect the first cottage on the right going into Colson Town is the oldest one because some of the details of the early structure. And if you look at the end wall on that cottage,
Yeah.
where this corner coins stick out beyond, see,
Right.
that's a good shot of it. We think they were going to build connected row housing, which is what they lived in Wales. See, they weren't allowed to own property in Wales. That's how the English kept them under their thumb. They had to pay ground rent.
Right.
So we feel that they realized here in America, they could afford to have a separate house with a little more room. And then they went ahead, and all the rest of them, their end in Cardiff, do not have that detail in their structure.
Yeah. This takes you down Main Street in Colson Town. This is the privately owned one, and these are the other 2 by the Old Line Museum there. This is the one that's been restored that Jamie showed earlier. This is one, there's some pretty severe damage in this one here. I call this number 3. And I think there's a question as to how to fix it or whether to fix it. And Don, you want to just address that real quickly?
It's gonna take a lot of money. We hope to restore it. It's identical to the other 2. You can see the slate fence post, the slate sidewalk, that's all original. That was the first house that Historic York Incorporated that has done the Gates House, the Plow Tavern restoration, that organization. That's the first house they restored outside the city of York itself.
Mhm.
And the fellow that bought it agreed to complete the restoration. They just did the outside, we never did. So meanwhile, we purchased that and two others. And the scaffolding, you see, that's holding it together right now. The money is not there right now. It has to be torn. The one wall has to be torn completely down and rebuilt. We hope to do that someday, but we have to finish the other two first.
Yeah.
First things first.
Yeah, put the money where it's most visually
Well,
used.
I mean, they all three had structural problems, believe me. So the first other two are almost there. That one has a ways to go, yes. So we hope to do that someday.
Great, thanks, Don. Now we're back at the church here and we're ready for a service in English and Welsh. And here we have our state senator looking at the library, which is still open. I'll just mention that this painting here, this is unusual. In my experience in Presbyterian churches, we don't typically use graven images or touch on things that might be construed as graven images in a chancellery. And but here we have this Welsh Presbyterian church, the Rehoboth Church has this painting. In York County, there's two painters of these, Guy Stambach, who did many of them in Methodist churches, and then there's Roth Brothers is another one that did paintings such as this in other churches. This one was probably ordered in because there's no signature on the painting at all. So it's just interesting. That would be part of the story, is to try and understand how that painting got there. My guess is it's a relatively recent addition.
75th anniversary.
Okay,
The church member
Which would be-
donated that to the church.
about 1891 plus 75. Okay, yeah.
No, 1854.
Okay, that's when they counted. Okay. Okay, so we were in the service in the Welsh Chapel. There was no message, but they followed the liturgy, and it seemed like they were doing the Book of Common Prayer. They're following the Book of Common Prayer, which is the Anglican liturgy or Episcopal liturgy. The songs were in Welsh and English. They used this songbook here, and the singing was beautiful. You just don't hear singing like that. I would just say in the Welsh tradition, the tenors went out. In this particular service that I went to, the tenors were beautiful. Don, I don't know if you were one of the tenors back there.
I tried.
You tried. But the senator had a tenor voice that you wouldn't
He
believe.
was unbelievable.
Yeah, so
He was a real Welshman. That's how you tell you.
yeah, the tenors, the Welsh are made with tenor voices, I think. So, but the rest of the singing was beautiful as well.
First Sunday in May.
I'll show that in a second.
Okay, I don't want to get ahead of
Okay.
you. Sorry.
So so what we had there was a Presbyterian pastor, Dick Basquil, leading a non-denominational service using the Anglican Book of Common Prayer in Welsh and English. That's in York County. That happened in York County. You know what? Sometimes we shortchange ourselves. This is special. People come up from over the world to attend these services. We'll talk about right now. This was what Don was getting at. If you want to know, if you want to go to one of these services, go to the Delaware Welsh Chapel Facebook page. And I took that from the page there, and you can see they talk about the services coming up. For example, here's a service on July 13th, a communion service coming up. If you want to know just how to take in the Delaware area and the Welsh culture, I've just come up with 5 really quick suggestions here. One is walk the grounds of the cottages, and there's a placard here, wayside marker here that gives a lot of really good information about them. You can walk around Colson Town. No one will say, I walked around there a number of times. No one said, hey, you shouldn't be here. As far as I know, it's a public street. Visit the Old Line Museum and you can get born again in there. And you check their website, you can find out when their hours are. Attend a church service at the Welsh Chapel that we've been talking about there. And then twice a year, they have, I'm going to try to say a festival of song that Jamie was finally mastering pronouncing. They have that, so that's twice a year. And this is the second Sunday in October they have it, and the first Sunday in May. Correct. Okay, and then go to the Delaware Cardiff Heritage Festival. And here you have, I think that's Don. Looks like you're splitting slate there, and that's Roger Wilson, many of us know. So the last slide here, and we'll take questions. what is the Welsh influence today? And I'm gonna point this out because I'm hoping that some of you all are aware of this, but maybe not. A Calvinistic Welsh pastor in London, by the name of Martin Lloyd Jones. He was a pastor there for a long time. He influenced thousands of ministers and congregants in his long pastorate. His books remain on many shelves in York County homes today. In fact, you can get his stuff at the York County Library System. You order it through the York County Library System. And then he influenced a guy that is really big in York County, a guy by the name of Tim Keller. And Tim Keller founded this multi-campus Redeemer Presbyterian Church in New York City, and his books also are in scores of homes around York County. So you have this culture that was reflected in Martin Lloyd Jones, is probably the most prominent theologian from that culture. And then he's parlayed it into Tim Keller, died a couple years ago, but has a large inventory of books. Many of the largest churches in York County, for example, Living Word, they would have their pastors would be well schooled on Tim Keller and Martin Lloyd Jones. And so that Welsh theology lives on a weekly basis, even outside of this Delta Cardiff area. So that's kind of that's a deepish dive. Questions? Questions that put everybody to sleep? Everybody's so excited and energetic, but Jamie is up there.
Yeah, the cottage done that we saw down there, is that considered Delta or is that Colson?
Peach Bottom Township is what it is.
Yeah.
Address is Delta, that's
The
the
address is.
postal address is Delta, that's the Green Road. If anybody wants to go down and take a look, use your GPS, which most people have, 6 Green Road, Delta, Pennsylvania, will get you to the cottages.
Yeah, again, there's information on here.
Is
Yeah.
Coastal Town a municipality? Or is it, no, it's not actual.
No, it was, the farmer that sold the lots off, many of them do, and his last name was Colson. He owns the farm next door, which is now an Amish farm, interesting. But, that's how it got its name.
Other questions or comments? Yeah, Mike.
20-some years ago, my wife and I went to Biltmore in Asheville, North Carolina. And we took one of the behind the scenes tours. And the docent took us up
The roof.
on the
door.
roof,
Yeah, the roof.
on the
door.
catwalks. And he says, the slate here came from a quarry in a small town in York, Pennsylvania.
Yeah, that's probably the most famous roofing project that Delta Slate is on.
They always manage to mess that up. Now they're telling people it came from Peach Bottom, Pennsylvania, which is across the river in Lancaster County. They still have a post office.
Yeah.
So.
All he could say was York County. He couldn't remember the town. So I took a stab and I said, well, you mean Delta? Oh, yeah, that's right.
They actually lost that history in that, of all places. Years ago, early internet days, my wife contacted them. I went through all the old Delta newspapers, which we have on microfilm and now, I don't know, flash drive, probably they're on the internet through the Historical Museum Commission Library up in Harrisburg. Anyway, I found the articles of the 2 quarries that shipped slate to George Washington Vanderbilt's new mansion in Asheville, North Carolina, 1893. So she sent this to them, early email, right? Well, they had actually lost that information. So anyway, my kids were little and my wife's college roommate lived close by, so we thought we'd take a drive down there. This has been probably 30 years ago or more. And they invited us, we all got free tickets, which are not cheap, right?
No, they're not.
And they gave us a roof tour. And it's incredible how that roof is just like new, absolutely, and it is peach bottom. I always heard that rumor, and I tell people that, and there's a lot of doubting Thomases out there about a lot of this stuff, so it really is. But that was proof in the pudding, and today, I don't know, it seems to change. As employees change, they seem to kind of, change it, but they usually tell people it's from Peach Bottom, Pennsylvania, which is Peach Bottom Township.
Okay, Richard?
Many years ago, when I was in college, I visited Henry Young. And he was, of course, here at the Historical Society of York County. But he told me, and I assume this is true, that at the great exhibition of the Crystal Palace, the first World's Fair in 1852, that the Delta slate was judged to be the best slate in the world, quality wise.
1851.
Okay,
Who was Queen Victoria's, what was his name?
Prince Albert.
Prince Albert, that was his idea to do that. And yeah, that's true. There's proof out there somewhere in Great Britain somewhere. I've been told, I've never seen it myself. But the proof's in the pudding. You want to talk about slate, they're estimating Peach Bottom now lasts 300 to 400 years.
I know Quickles Church and it's Conewago Township, they replaced their roof and they had to get slate from Wales. That's been in the last 20 years.
Yeah, you can. Okay. I don't want to shout. You can buy slate in this country, where's Peach Bottom, they don't make anymore. What Peach Bottom is so good, it often ends up as being used, but perfectly good. In fact, the upper cottage, the first cottage on the right we talked about, they had a fire at one time and almost burned down and they tore most of the slate roof off and the insurance company refused to replace it with slate. So just 2 years ago, we have a local slate roofer who does a really good job. He saved a lot of slate roofs and he agrees with everybody that it's the best there is. And we use slate. I had a local farmer donate slate from his house to put back on the cottage. It was even the same size and there must be 20 different sizes. So you talk about fate or whatever. But it was perfectly good. And that's what we put back on. It was already 150 years old. It should go at least another 150.
There's a company in Northern Maryland that collects slate, let's say repurposes it. And they have stacks and stacks and stacks of it, that, you know, that they must, I think their company worked on your house there. They have a yard full of slate stacked up.
Where's that at?
It's Northern Maryland.
Yeah, there's a couple places around that have slate yards. There's one in Wilmington, Delaware. They're around, but if you tell them slate, Peach Bottom slate, or a slate roofer that has done that job for enough years, they all know that it's the best there is. They just don't make it anymore. See? So yeah, they repurpose Peach Bottom all the time, and I see a lot of it go in a dumpster too, which kind of breaks my heart. But yeah, now our local roofer, he has quite the stash himself of slate. Yes.
Yeah.
So
Other questions or comments? Yes, Adam.
Questions for Jamie. I was intrigued by her comment about how the Englishmen, the companies, but the workers were Welsh. So did they have Welsh foremen or English foremen? Do you know much about like who the overseers were between management and the workers themselves?
I don't remember that part in the book. Could they specify that?
that's not in the book.
Yeah.
But they were Welsh because they spoke Welsh.
Yeah.
If you wanted to communicate with your workers, you better know the language. No offense, they weren't all English owners. There was a point in time where a lot of them were. Some of them were Welsh owners. Some of them
Later
were,
on.
yeah, probably early on. Later in the slate industry, like after 1900, a lot of big corporations started buying into the slate business because there was money in it at the time. And unfortunately, why a slate usage became very expensive and the Great Depression hit, most of them just closed down. That's what they did. So it went through a series of ownerships. In Wales itself, absolutely English ownership, even today. That was a really talking point as far as union relations, worker relations, cooperation. The English were kind of tyrants and had them under their thumb, as I mentioned before, because they owned the land, they owned everything, and they still do today. So that was one of the reasons they emigrated over here, was to get away from the English owners who were domineering, and also the hated church tax. Didn't matter what denomination you were over there, including the Welsh nonconformists, they call them, or Protestants, we can call them. They took 10%. The Anglican Church took it, and that was very much frowned upon or disliked. Yes, and that's one of the reasons that they liked it here better. So, not to get on religion, but that was a big part of it.
We haven't talked about religion much today, have we?
Yeah.
Other questions or comments? Yes?
Since the industry died out,
due to the. Since the industry died out due to the depression and other factors, the slate's still there. Has there ever been any attempt to re-mine in areas that can be remined?
Yeah, that's a good, Don, you probably know that.
There's been some talk about it, you know, everybody, I show the quarries to, or the slate dumps, the tips, the waste dumps. Asked me, is there any left? Did they run out of slate? They barely touched it. Of course, OSHA today just about destroys any effort at dangerous. Slate quarrying was statistically more dangerous than coal mining. And that's saying something. You know, the deaths and injuries in Pennsylvania alone in coal mining is unbelievable. Same in slate quarries. But yeah, I've had a couple people talk to me about it. And I think that probably today there are 2 slate quarries left operating in Pennsylvania that I'm aware of. The slate quarry, the slate producing region north of Allentown, Slatington, Penn Argyll, Bangor, Northampton County. There were once hundreds of quarries up there. It was the largest slate producing region in the United States. And there are 2 quarries left. And I have spoken to the owners, the slate I used to split, that's where I had to go to get it. And the fellow told me that Ocean's just putting him out of business. And since then, a roofing company in New Jersey has bought both quarries. And that's the last I heard. The issue, there's more than one issue. The main issue is OSHA with the regulations. And the other issue is getting people to do the work. It was just horrible working conditions. And, you know, even today, it's extremely dangerous. And to get people to do that kind of work out in the weather, you know, cold, rain, heat, it's just about impossible, which a lot of manufacturing concerns are experiencing now, getting good people. So it's just barely hanging on. As far as buying slate, you can buy slate, not just America, you can buy it. Canada's a big slate producer. Of course, Wales is still quite a big slate producer. The largest slate producer in the United States is Spain, as far as countries go. There's a number of newer quarries in Spain. But yeah, Peach Bottom, there's still plenty of it there. It's just Nobody to mine.
You're being legislated out of existence virtually.
I think the slate was in vertical seams or nearly vertical seams, and therefore there are more slides, more.
Yeah.
I did a study of the 17, I think that Don gave me this is a translation of what's on tombstones in Slateville Cemetery. So I did an average of this sample, there's 17 or so, and the average age of death was 54 years of age, and this is in the 1800s, and which was about common for that era. So it was dangerous. It was definitely dangerous. That's probably a small sample, but it was people didn't live typically down that area to be 70 or 80. There's a few, but if you go to that cemetery, there's an awful lot of 50-year-old deaths in that cemetery.
There was no social or financial backstop, no social security, no workman's compensation, no insurance of any kind. And yeah, they would work till they couldn't work anymore.
Right, or died,
Yeah.
or were injured. Anything else? I don't know how long we've gone, and I'm glad to know. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
I had a quick question for Mr. Robinson.
Dawn.
Thank you, appreciate it. How much is still needed to restore the I think you referenced the 3rd cottage, or the one with the structural damage? And the second part to that is, if anyone would like to donate, would they make those donations to the Old Line Museum, or what would the best way to go about that be?
Well, if you're talking about the cost to do the 3rd cottage wall, probably, I don't know, you're probably talking anywhere from $50,000 to $100,000 to do it. The problem is finding a stonemason today that is willing to do it. Any donations you wish to make, you make them to the Old Line Museum, because they're the owners, and they're nonprofit, 501c3, like any normal nonprofit museum. And yes, we that's how we survive. No government money, no grant money. And as we get money, that's as we do our projects. Yes.
If someone wanted to earmark a
Thank you.
donation to the cottage number 3, the one with the bad structural damage, could they do that? Because you've said that you would rather use scarce resources to make the other two in better shape. Could they designate for the third cottage?
Absolutely. My wife has a fund that, in fact, it's old book sale money. What's left of that, that she's keeping back for that eventual project. It has to be torn down, not the whole thing, just the one wall. And it's interesting because the stone walls are only about that far in the ground. Now around here, we have regulations, frost-free footer, I don't know, 32 inches. Where they come from in Wales, it doesn't get near as cold or near as hot as it does here. They have an island climate. Great Britain's a big island. So they didn't understand the concept of a need for a frost-free footer. So that's the problem. The wall has to be torn down completely. And then rebuilt, not footer port, and rebuilt that way. So that's not gonna be cheap. We still have aspirations of, a white knight riding in with, $100 million in the Pennsylvania State Lottery or something. But anyway, she does have a fund that if you want to designate it for anything you want, that's fine. And we've actually been pretty fortunate with our other restoration efforts and our funding, and we're getting there, right? That's getting close. So once those other two are complete, then we will hopefully concentrate on that, and that'll be it.
Other questions? These are great questions.
Yeah, they are good questions. I can always tell what kind of a crowd I've got. The good questions I get. So thank you. It's all real good.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much.
Thanks again for coming. The meeting is adjourned.